We're now on Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis Sofu Tami Tumachamura. Anyway, we see that if you have something that will be Matame Tumachamura, meaning Tumas Nevela, or in the case of Oftar, the special Tuma of Beis Habli of a Kazais of Oftar, then you don't need any sort of moisture in order to make it Mukhshal Kabul Tumah. So now we're stuck with Rav Asi because Rav Asi on Amud Aleph was committed to a ruling that if a Jew shechts a non-kosher animal for a guy, or a non-Jew shechts a kosher animal for a Jew, and the animal is still mefarches, then Rav Asi said not only do you need machshava in order to be makabel tumas ochlin, but you also need moisture. You also need hechsher. Why? It's so full of tami tuma chamura. It will become an avela. Omar Chizkiah. Again, I'm going to try to get through Chizkiah. Very difficult for me to understand Chizkiah, but we got to do the best we can. Hol v'yachol legorol amida al pachas mikazayis. We're not absolutely sure and certain that this nevela is sofa litami tuma chamura. Why? Because tuma chamura of nevela is only a kazayis of nevela. If you come in contact with a kazayis of nevela, then you go into the migdash, whatever it is. But here, potentially, what he could do is he can cut away at the meat of the dead animal, scrape it away until it's small pieces that are less than a kazayis. And he's saying that since potentially he could shred away this meat and get all the pieces to be less than a kazayis, and therefore it would not be metame tumas nevela, that potentiality, that's not a word, but anyway, means that it's not sofo litame tuma chamura, it's not definite, and therefore it requires hechsher. But Rabbi Yochanan, oh, okay, we didn't get to Rabbi Yochanan yet. Okay, so again, we're talking about an animal that was shechted in those two scenarios, but it's still convulsing. And Chizkiah is telling us that the meat is not metame tumas nevela. And the Gemara has a problem. Omar le Rab Yirmiyah le Rab Zera umi Omar Chizkiah hachi. Is it really so that a convulsing animal, according to Chizkiah, is not metame tumas nevela? V'itmar, we learned the following: a statement of Chizkiah, shochat b'shnayim or rov shnayim. Now, here we get into the following issue. We're talking now about Avram Menachai, or we'll see another concept called Basar Aporish Menachai. And the question is, when is the animal considered halachically dead such that a limb from the animal is no longer Avram Menachai, because the animal's already dead? And the answer is that even though you've already done shechita, but since the animal is still convulsing, Chizkiah says, Amar, Eina le'evarim, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yeshna le'evarim. Let's start with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that there's still an iser of Avrim and Achai. Why? Because it's convulsing. And if it's convulsing, it's not dead, it's alive. Chizkiah Amar, Eina le'evarim, Mesahi. Chizkiah says that since he did a kosher shechita, the very moment he does the shechita, the animal is considered halachically dead, and therefore there's no Avram and Achai. Now you might ask, but why is that shechita meaningful for a guy? A guy is also Avram and Achai, has nothing to do with shechita. I mean, if Chizkiah would say that it's dead as far as Dina Yisrael is concerned, and the shechita is matir, the Isra Avram and Achai, that I understand. But how could it be matir Avram and Achai for a guy. Why is that shechita meaningful for the guy? And here, the commentaries introduce a halachic principle that anything that's mutter to a Yisrael, ipso facto, is mutter to a Ben Noach. We can't have a chumrah and an iser for a Ben Noach that doesn't apply to Yisrael. So in Avram and Achai, since the shechita for Yisrael would remove the iser Avram and Achai, and be matir that iser. Therefore, ipso facto, for the Ben Noach, it's also mutter. And that's what Chizkiah means when he says Mesa. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Yeshno Levarit. Lav Mesahi. So Rabbi Yochanan is saying that if the animal is still convulsing, it's a farcheses, then it's still alive. And it makes no difference if the shchita was a valid shchita of shnayim or rov shnayim. Nevertheless, since the animal is still convulsing, it's still alive. Now, one second. Oh, we talking about a kosher animal or non-kosher animal? Just one second. Let me get my head screwed in. Um, I think we're talking even about a non-kosher animal. Let me just see if I could check that out. Yeah, I think we're talking even about yeah, because I think willy-nilly we have to assume it's a non-kosher animal because if it was a kosher animal that was shechted, then it would not be Avram and Achai for a Jew, and therefore ipso facto would be mutter to a guy, as we said before. So I think we have to assume we're talking about now a non-kosher animal, which would not be mutter for Yisrael. He can't eat it because it's a non-kosher animal, and the guy can't eat it, according to Rabbi Yochanan, because it's Avram and Achai, because it's convulsing. And even though it was shechted, but it's a non-kosher animal, so the shechit of a non-kosher animal does not render the animal as dead as long as it's convulsing, and therefore it still be an Isur Avram and Achai. As far as the Jew is concerned, it's irrelevant because it's usher anyway in any event because it's a non-kosher animal. Now again, let's go over Chizkiah. Chizkiah is saying that it's considered dead, even though it's convulsing. And why is that? And that removes the Isur Avram and Achai. Why is that? Because there was a shechita. Now let's get back to Chizkiah's statement regarding Tumas Nevela. Right? Chizkiah basically assumed that as long as the animal is convulsing, the meat is not Mitami Tumas Nevela. And now we get Reb Zera's explanation, or shall I say, justification of Chizkiah with a brisker tzvei din. Amaleh. So this question was originally raised by Rabbi Yomi, and now Reb Zera is responding to that question in order to reconcile Chizkiah. Yatzasa mechlal chaya ulechlal mesa lo ba. If I had a month, I would spend a month on this line in the Gemara. But let's just try to understand it. The status of this animal, which is a non-kosher animal that was shechted by Yisrael with a full-fledged shechita, is a schizophrenic split personality. Why? On the one hand, Yatzasa Michal Chaya, the shechita the shechita is meaningful enough because, again, had Yisrael done the shechita on a kosher animal, it would be a perfectly good shechita. It's enough to remove Aver min achai, but the animal is still convulsing, and therefore l'chlal mesa lo ba, so that even though it's not Aver min achai, but it's not mesa either. And as far as nevela is concerned, it's not metami tumas nevela. Gufa shacha b'shnayim arov shnayim v'adayin hi mefarcheses. Chizki Omar Eina le'evarim Rabbi Yochanan Amar Yeshna le'evarim Amar Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says, I want to tip the scale in favor of Rabbi Yochanan based on a brisa. Nekot laha to Rabbi Yochanan except Rabbi Yochanan, which means that there's still an Iser Evid Machai because the animal is convulsing. The Tani Rabbi Oshia Kavase, the Tani Rabbi Oshia Yisrael sheshachat behemot mei aliyovik chavim. So now we're talking about that one of the two cases the scenarios that we discussed where a Yid is shechting a non-kosher animal on behalf of the idol worshiper. And what does the Brisa of Oshia state? Shachat b'shnayim arov shnayim. There was a perfectly good shechita on this non-kosher animal. Umefarcheses, but the animal is still convulsing. Metame tumas ochlin. Right, the Jew had in mind through the shechita to prepare this meat for the consumption of the guy, and therefore it's metame tumas ochlin. On the other hand, ain't metame tumas nevel because since it's still mefarcheses, it's still alive. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan, if you recall, said that Yeshna Levarim, there's an Iser of Avrim and Achai, because it's still convulsing and it's not dead. Is Aver HaPorish Mimeno Kiporish Min Achai. Despite the fact that it's Mitami Tumas Ochlin, because the Machshava of the Yisrael who shechted the animal on behalf of the God was to prepare it as an ochel, and therefore that's sufficient to generate tumas ochlin. But as far as whether the animal's alive or dead, it's still alive because it's convulsing. And therefore, if you take an aver from it, then that aver is aver minachai. By the way, aver minachai is also even after the animal dies. Once it's aver minachai, it remains aver minachai. Then there's something called porish minachai, which we didn't talk about yet. That's a separate halacha of, I'm sorry, a basar porish menachai, that flesh that was attached from an animal while it's alive, not a limb with all its different parts of the limb, but rather flesh. Okay, that we'll have to. I don't know if he's going to talk about it now. It's not tame because it's not a limb, right? A limb is tame if it has meat, sinew, and bones. However, basar porish min achai is also for a ben noach midaraisa. For Israel, I think it's only the Rabbanon. That's what he says here. Also b'nei noach. And then once it's Eivim and Achai, because the animal is still convulsing, then it remains Eivim and Achai, afilu liachar shetetzi nafsha, even after it dies. Anyway, this brisa clearly accepts the ruling of Rabbi Yochanan that if a Yid slaughters an animal on behalf of Ben Noach and the animal is still convulsing, then it still is an Isra Eivim and Achai. Okay, now we start this brisa and we continue in the brisa. So far, what we saw in the brisa is a clear-cut proof for Rabbi Yochanan. But now we go on in the brisa. He did not do, the Israel did not do a proper shechita. Eina mitame tumas ochlin. Well, for example, nechara, right? He pierces the veshet and the kon in the veshet. Ein ba tumas shel klum. Okay, what goes on here? Piercing the pipes has no parallel in a kosher animal. If a Jew would take a kosher animal and pierce it, it's not meaningful. It's not matir. Or if he shechted one simon. So I'd read to you a summary of Rashi. Since there's no parallel case in which the meat would be permitted if he does this piercing, for if a Jew severs one pipe of a behema kshera, it remains prohibited. It's not a proper shechita. In the case of a behema tmeya, a non-kosher animal, the meat is not considered foodstuff. Why not? I don't know. He intended it for the idol worship to eat it, but maybe since it's still convulsing, and it still has, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Bryce supports Rabbi Yochanan, the status of Eivim and Achai, therefore it can't be considered food, because it's also to a guy. Oved Kochav, now we have the flip case. The guy shechts a kosher animal on behalf of Israel, and it's mefarcheses. Oh, so if it's mefarcheses, then it's still alive, and obviously it's Eivim and Achai. But mitame tumas ochlin, avalo tumas nevela. Now, why is this mitame tumas ochlin if it's still considered alive? So the guy wanted this to be consumed by a Jew. And what the guy did, in inverted commas, was a perfectly good shechita. Meaning, had the Yisrael done that shechita, and we're talking about a behemoth tahora, then it would have been matir the basar for achila. So again, not that I understand this too well, but the bottom line is that the idolater's intention to make the clean animal fit for a Jew through his act of shechita, which is, by the way, meaningless, renders it foodstuff with respect to Tumas Ochlin. Again, I'm missing a little bit of the lumdus here, but somehow Tumas Ochlin doesn't depend upon whether Lamaisa now you could eat it. It depends upon the intention. Avol lo Tumas Nevela. 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 Avol because it's still alive. It's convulsing. Evra portion menik portion menachai, bosa portion menik portion menachai, also ben noach, ve'afil lacher to tetzinash. Shochet ba'echad orov echad. Now we get to the parallel case. Before we talked about a Jew who did this kind of a improper shechita on a non-Jewish, non-kosher animal. Now we're talking about a non-Jew who does this improper shechita on a kosher animal. It's garnish mit garnish. It doesn't even look like the shechita of Yisrael. Is therefore ain't a mitami to Masochlin. Even if the guy Nechara, whatever he did with it, he had intention of feeding it to Yisrael, it's meaningless. Because there's no act of shechita that had it been implemented by Yisrael, it would have been mat to the basar, and ein batum shel klum. Shochet ovikuchav makom she'eino so treifa. Now we're back to Yisrael who does shechita on a kosher animal on behalf of a guy. No. Who actually did the shechita? Just 1 second. Okay, so now we have a case where the akum shechted the animal. So here on both sides, we have to differentiate between the kana and the veshet. Because if a guy shechts half of the veshet, which is called in English the trachea, and then the Yisrael picks it up from there in a kind of collaboration, and he completes the shechita, then it's kosher. Not so in the case of the kana, of the windpipe. So what's makom she'ena osa treifa? Mean the guy shechted less than half, let's say 49.9% of the trachea of the veshet. So it's not a treifa animal. In fact, the Yisrael could now come in, by Yisrael Gamra, right? That's the next line in the Brisa. Ksher. Shachat Yisrael. Right, so if the shechita was completed by the guy, even though the shechita was begun, the first half of the shechita was done by Yisrael, then the animal is non-kosher, even in the case where the Yisrael shechted the kana, but I think he did less than, well, 1 second, let me just see. Oh, we're talking about the veshet? Whoa, this is a big chiddush. I don't remember that we learned this, but he says it's a sugya back on Daf Yutes, so hispakti lishka. But what happens here is that even though the Yisrael shechted most of the veshet, but nevertheless, the animal is still alive and it's convulsing, and therefore if the guy completes the shechita, it's possible. He says here the critical part of the shechita is its conclusion, which makes the animal expire. And since it was performed by the guy, therefore it's psula. Okay, I mean that's something we should go back to Daf Yutes if we were doing Chazar and Chullin. Okay, now we have the last part of the brisa. It seems that Avram and Achai is very healthy, but we're not allowed to eat Avram Achai. Is there a way that we can eat Avram and Achai and get the health benefits without violating the Isra Achilas Avram and Achai? How do you do that? Chotech chizayis basu b'beis hashchita. Molcho yafa yafa b'dicha yafa yafa. It's full of blood. Umamtin lo ad shetetzi nafsha v'ochlo echad ovli kochav yisrael mutarbo. And that's Messiah Leila Rabbi Idi Baravin, who repeats the same story again, word for word. Amar Rav Idi Baravin Rav Yisrael Melchon. Harotze sheyavri, he needs this Eivrim and Achai for health purposes. Is chotech kizayis bosom beis hashchita molcho yofa yofa medicha yofa yofa and mamtin la ad shetetze nafsha. Echad ovikom ech yisol mutarba. So what's the underlying principle over here? That he shechted the animal, and the animal hasn't died yet, which means that it's still convulsing. And he cuts off in the throat area where the flesh is exposed, cuts it immediately, right before the animal dies, and it's no longer Eivrim and Achai, because the kosher shchita, which is matir lachila, and removes the Eivrim and Achai, and he gets the Eivrim and Achai. He has to salt it very well because it's full of dam. Okay, we'll try to just finish up. Boy, Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar has a suffix. We said that if the shchita was not a shchita at all, like one of the two simonim, or he pierced nechira through the simonim, then in such a case, then it's not subject to or susceptible to tumas ochel. Shaba daras b'mal. What if he did a shchita, but it was a shchita psula? Is that like nothing? It's like piercing the thing? Or it's a separate halach in the chalos matir of shchita? And the question is whether or not, in such a case, the meat is susceptible to tumas ochel. Omaleahu Saba, some elderly gentleman said to Rabbi Elazar, Hachi Omer Rabbi Yochanan, this is what we heard in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Tzrika Hechsher Shchita Kibhei Tahura. Unless you did a proper shchita, the animal is not susceptible to tumas ochlin. And then we'll finish up here on the bottom of Kuf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis. Hechsher lemai. Well, what does Rabbi Yochanan mean when he says that tzricha hechsher? Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak bedika sakin. Interesting. Rabbi Yochanan held that in order to have a proper shchita, you need to check the knife, make sure there are no nicks on the knife before you shecht it. Boy minei Rab Zera mirav sheishes maushe tatzil al habluim shetocha. So you have this case of a convulsing animal. Now, normally, if let's say you have an olam mes and an animal swallowed something, or a human being swallowed something, and the animal is inside the olam mes, then that which is swallowed up is not nitma betumas ohel, because it's belua. Belua means it's like, it's swallowed up, it's hidden from view. So that's called tatzil. Tatzil means that the blia itself, the swallowing it up, is going to protect or save the animal from becoming tameh. And now the question is, in those two scenarios that we discussed, either where a Yisrael shechted a non-kosher animal for a guy, or a guy shechted a kosher animal for a Jew, and the animal is still convulsing, so would it save that which is balua from tumas ohel? Just 1 second. Well, what's the logic here to say? I think if it's still alive, if it's still alive, then it could save under the halacha of blua from tumah. But if it died, then there's no difference between the carcass of the animal and that which is swallowed inside of it, right? It contracts tumas mes through this ohel. So Reb Zera was vacillating about the case, the two cases that we described, whether or not the animal, since it's convulsing, is still alive. Amalei, so Rav Sheshes replies, mitama tumas ochlin matzeles. It's considered that it's still alive. And that's why it's mitame tumas ochlin, because it's considered an ochel. No, just 1 second. No, I'm sorry. You read this with a question mark. It's a rhetorical question. Mitame tumas ochlin matzeles? How could you consider it as a live animal when it's mitame tumas ochlin? If it's mitame tumas ochlin, then it's not alive anymore. Amalei Rav Sheshes, Rav Zera responds to Rav Sheshes, Eina mitame tumas nevelos velo tatzil. Wait a minute, you have to admit that there's no tumas nevela because the animal is still convulsing, so it's still alive. How could it be, therefore, that it doesn't matzil, it doesn't prevent the tumah of ohel through belia? Amar Abaye, Eina matzeles al habluim shebetocha domitami tumas ochlin. You're right, it can't be matzil under belia because it's already dead, haraya that it conveys tumas ochlin, but yet it is considered alive. Again, it's veidinim here, as far as revia, as far as bestiality is concerned. Eina mitami tumas nevela. Again, we have to spend shiva nikiyim here to explain Abaye. Anyway, we'll just quickly finish up. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ha'alel, right? If he, as Rav Huna explained, if he gathered together these pieces of flesh that were connected to the hide, and there's a kizayis in one place, then it's metame tumas nevela. Rav Huna v'usha kinso, he gathered it together. Rav Huna shnei chatzoy zeisim sheyesh al gabi ha'or. If there are two volumes of flesh on the on the hide, and each volume is a half a zayis, ha'or mevatlan. Now we get back to that concept called bittul. Any shred of meat that is smaller than a kazayis is considered negligible, since the shred was excised from the meat and remained attached to the hide. It's negligible. Its identity as meat is nullified and becomes classified as a hide as or. Now each half a zayis piece is nullified, and therefore once you nullify each piece unto itself, the two pieces cannot integrate to form tumas nevela, even though if you had it together you would have a full kazayis. In any event, Rav Huna is teaching us that the hide nullifies them, and this nullification of the small shreds occurs automatically, even without the flayer's intention. And the Gemara now wants to know, I'll leave the man, I'll leave the Rabbi Yishmael, ha'amar lo mevatel or, and I'll leave the Rabbi Akiva, pshita, ha'amar mevatel or. So this is a machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael in a Mishnah later on Kuf Chaf Dalid, which we didn't get to yet. And that's our homework for Shabbos in Mirz Hashem. Okay then? So I guess if we have Kuf Chav Beis, then on Sunday we have Kuf Chav Gimel. Kuf Chav Gimel on Sunday.